Good afternoon, or for some of you, good morning. This is Larry Bridgesmith, and I'm delighted to be on this webinar with my partner and associate, Kat Moon. One of those crazy people that has too many hats to wear. I'm not an academic, I'm a pracademic. I work at the Vanderbilt Law School in the Innovation in Law program. I also am the crazy guy who left the security of the practice of law, and now I'm into my second legal tech startup, and that's been a great deal of fun, which is how Kat and I have gotten together and worked in this field, in my view, with such a delight. Kat is an 18-year lawyer, Vanderbilt law grad. She also has a master's in how she kept her mind sane, because she, over the course of her career, has become a human-centered design specialist, and she's taught me a lot, and I think our opportunity to work together and to work with all of you who are legal project management specialists as well and or interested in the field really can glean a great deal from design thinking, as we call it. So the first question I have for all of us to consider, if we can take a moment to think about it. I've been trying for over 7 years to help lawyers understand, both in-house counsel and outside, that legal project management is an extraordinarily valuable tool that is essential. And I haven't had a great deal of success. And some of you can say, well, you've obviously got the wrong message, Larry, and that may be true. But I'm curious if all of us in our more honest moments would admit we don't understand either why it's so difficult to convince our colleagues of the value of legal project management. We know last fall that the Extero survey of in-house counsel on LPM said that almost 80% of in-house counsel saw LPM as essential, but only about 24% of them said that they were doing it well, and the rest said they're not doing it at all. And those that were doing it said that they were all doing it manually. And more recently, the Georgetown Legal Executive Institute published what just are the most astonishing statistics about the economics of law and concluded the following: we are in a buyer's market, and if you can imagine anyone saying this, the billable hour is dead because of the purchasing power of legal operations counsel and those that are buying the services of outside law. And when you look at the metrics for their 10, the economic indicators are all down and into negative territory. That seems to be going up are billable rates and the cost of delivering legal services. That is simply unsustainable. And then last fall, we saw the Altman-Weil survey that, again, law firm leaders agreed that this buyer's market we're in is permanent and it's not going to get any better. That legal departments, LPOs, and technology are taking the law to be done by outside counsel, and the pie is shrinking, so that those that are still trying to provide services from the outside law perspective are fighting over and taking pie. And what do they say they're doing about it? Most of them say nothing. And many claim that clients don't want them to change. And some are honest enough to say that their partners won't allow it. So the question I have is, is innovation and efficiency merely a marketing tool, or is it real? I was fortunate enough 2 weeks ago to be at Harvard Law School in the LWOW, or Law Without Walls, kickoff, and David Wilkins of Harvard Law, who, as we all recognize, is one of the leaders in innovation in law, said there's a basic disconnect between client and lawyer interests. There's a lack of alignment, was his word. And he proceeded to say, and he said it several times over the course of his 30-minute remarks, human-centered design thinking is a necessary tool for lawyers, and so I'm proud to say that my colleague Kat Moon is undoubtedly going to be the first to teach it at Vanderbilt Law, probably beginning next fall. And it is something that at least we should take the time to understand how that might relate to the difficulty in getting legal project management to be widely adopted.
So Larry, incredibly cogent points to share from numerous sources that all seem to be pointing in a very similar direction, if it's not exactly the same direction. And as you and I are experiencing in the legal project management class that we're teaching at Vanderbilt Law School this semester, human-centered design thinking, which I'm just going to refer to as design thinking for efficiency's sake, really does provide an amazing array of tools for the legal project management process. And when we're presenting those to our students, and the fundamental concept is that a project is just a group of people that's trying to accomplish a goal or series of goals through a process, and keeping at the core the fundamental understanding that it is people that are having to work together. And as you approach the project process, all phases from that perspective, the tools become really meaningful and obvious. But before you get to any of that, there are some additional fundamental points that I think are very helpful to understand when you're considering using design thinking tools in your project management process.
And so I'm a bit of an organizational development wonk. I guess if I had known there was such a thing when I went to law school 40 plus years ago, I might not have stopped at the law school experience and gone. I have been totally fixated on how organizations and teams of people work, or as Lencioni has suggested, how they don't work. So if you've done any work in that field, you know Lencioni's seminal work on the 5 dysfunctions of a team, best illustrated in this graphic, which shows where any team must begin and progress to in order to achieve results. And it begins with trust. And if we are not competent or capable of building trust through vulnerability, then we're probably never going to get to the ability to master conflict. Know that every team is going to entail a phase of conflict for them to be able to get through it, and doing so is where we learn how to be first committed and then accountable in order to achieve results. So I think there's a lot of knowledge that's inherent in this model that we may need to stop along the way to consider and then begin to become skilled at it if we're going to create cohesive teams in the project management arena for implementation or execution.
Well, and I think,
and
Larry,
maybe we need to step back a little and look at some of the fundamentals.
Well, and I think, Larry, one reason that we're bringing up this point,
and so we all,
is for me fundamental to this process, and this is something we're talking with our students about, is the fact that many of them are going to be going into organizations and cultures that do not have a clear project management structure in place. Organizations may be experimenting with them, they may be happening in certain practice groups, or certain people may be using it, but typically not going to be widespread, and definitely not something any of them have experienced through summer experiences. So helping them understand they're going into a place that likely isn't using project management, this is going to be somewhat foreign, and how do you introduce and start lowering barriers to making project management effective within an organization. And you've got another good point to make, I think, Larry, about the team forming stage and what that process looks like.
Well, we've all experienced this in our work, and we know this as legal project management, whether professionals or just adherents. And that is that every team has to go through the stages, first of forming and then inevitably through the period of storm. And the question that I have for us to consider is, how good are we at getting past the storm and into the norms of behavior that allow the team to perform? So forming, storming, norming, and performing in a cyclical way is what we encounter every time we submit the legal project management experience.
Yeah, because again, fundamentally this is a group of people that have come together for a purpose, and the visual I keep front and center when I'm working on a project is the idea that the project is a journey. So you're going on a journey with a group of people. You are forming the project team through the various phases to debriefing after conclusion of the project, hopefully achieving your goals successfully. So a question I ask is, what is your compass for guiding the stakeholders on this journey? How are you keeping everybody on course, on path? And further, and I think this is really important, especially if you are going into an organization that does not already have an existing culture that welcomes and encourages project management as a form of doing work. How do you create what I consider an elegant journey for both the internal and external stakeholders who you're going to be working with on this team? And I picked the word elegant very intentionally because I think it focuses on the aspect of pleasing, so pleasingly ingenuous or simple, pleasingly graceful and stylish. And why I think that's important is, especially if you're introducing project management into an organization that does not otherwise have it, you want to invite people, encourage them, you want to create a journey that they want to join. And so I think the pleasing aspect really can't be eliminated from your goals and how you're introducing and integrating project management into an organization. And I think that's where human-centered design thinking really comes into play in a very effective and frankly powerful way. So we are not here to talk in great detail about the design thinking process. That would take hours and hours, but I did want to offer a graphic that shows the essential phases of the full human-centered design thinking process, starting with the empathy phase, going into defining points of view, defining your problem or solution, brainstorming those solutions, building a prototype, something that actually exists in the physical world that reflects the ideas and the solution you've come up with, and then returning to users and having them test this. And that really is a very cyclical pattern. So you get to testing, you go right back to empathize, and you go through that series of activities throughout. So I wanted to offer this overview, and within this context, it's kind of the framework that you can hang things on. We're really talking about tools, actual activities, things you can do throughout the project management process to integrate human-centered design thinking into the process, which really is focusing on your users, your stakeholders, meeting their needs, and constantly keeping them front and center in what I call empathy mode. So, there are literally dozens of specific tools and techniques that design thinking offers that are relevant throughout the project management process. And this is just a scatter shot of a small number. I pulled these graphics from IDEO's website. They've got some fantastic resources for those who are interested in really getting hands dirty in the design thinking process, and I'm going to, with the slides that are going to be distributed after the webinar, I'm going to also include links to some of the IDEO and other resources that really provide both a shallow overview and a deep dive into some of these tools, because I think for those who are interested in integrating some of these things, they're incredibly useful and helpful. But I will say, I think, Larry, you and I talk about this all the time, especially with our clients. We all have a tool right now that can be put to work every single day in the work we do in project management. And that tool is very simple. It is asking good questions, asking lots of good questions, listening to the answers, really listening, taking what you learn and asking more good questions. So, you know, at its simplest, it's an interview process, a group interview process, but it really is the idea of being curious, inquiry, not making assumptions, and pushing past the assumptions you might see others making. Larry, what are your thoughts on tools and specifically the question
Well, this is where I get to make.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is where I get to make a mea culpa, because as I said earlier, I've been practicing law for 40 years, and I've realized in recent years that what I've done is the typical lawyer thing. I can't tell you how many times a client has come to me and said, Larry, I've got a problem, and I already know the answer. The solution is clearly formed in my mind, and then I impose it, because after all, I'm the lawyer. They came to me for my expertise, my wisdom, my judgment. And so I force fit solutions on client problems without asking the pertinent questions. Now, I'm going to take it to the next step, because I think this is where we may have, as legal project management professionals and or practitioners, encountered the same difficulty. This is a question that I have of everyone on this call. Have we made the mistake of force-fitting what we know about project management, lean, efficiency, Six Sigma upon clients who are not either ready for that, nor is that necessarily what they signed up for? This week, earlier this week, we did a run-through of a program that for the first time the Owen School of Management at Vanderbilt and the law school are jointly producing, which will be the first executive education offerings for the actual practitioners without academic credit but with experiential credit, to help them understand the things that neither law school nor our history of practice has taught us. And one of them, the first one, is in legal project management. And we've teamed up with the Associate Dean of the Owen School, Nancy Heyer, a PhD, and before she was an academic, she ran the Global Project Management Initiatives for Hewlett-Packard. She knows a little bit about project management. And so she was running us through an exercise just to get the sense of how her section was going to be run, and I fell into that trap. The trap that says, I know the answer, I'm invincible, let me show you how smart I am. And in doing so, there was another team that was a bit more astute and frankly less lawyerly. And they asked the client, in this case, Nancy, all kinds of questions about the project. And we thought we were being pretty smart and asked pertinent questions, but they were all around the solution I already had in my mind. So when we were asked then to implement the project, we had 5 minutes to do so, and our team didn't win because I didn't ask the questions, the right questions, enough questions. I assumed, and in doing so, we didn't get it, and the other team did, because they asked lots and lots and lots of questions. So I think this falls into the same trap that I've fallen into as a lawyer, and my question to all of us who want to be effective in helping both law and practitioners of law and the entire legal industry do better, faster, cheaper, more effectively, and for those who are selling legal services more profitably, as we know they can, are we doing our job of being transparently vulnerable, creating trust by asking lots of authentic questions of our clients or the people with whom we are working to create and execute a project? Or are we falling into the lawyer trap of, I know what you need and I'll tell you what it is? It's a question I pose, and it's something that I hope that we can all walk away with and ask ourselves seriously whether we're doing design thinking, which is client-focused for all, and intended to allow them to educate us about the problem they're trying to solve. And so that's why, in my mind, the bringing of these tools and methodologies together will help us do a better job of helping others embrace legal project management. One of the other hats that I wear, and again, this makes me even triply dumb, is I am a mediator and I teach mediation, and the thing that I say more often than anything else in the classes or the courses that I teach is the mediator's most powerful tool is the art of the question. But when I put on a lawyer hat or an expert hat as opposed to a facilitator's hat, I forget that. And so can we use the Pareto principle in when we're speaking with clients, when we're seeking to implement these exercises, these initiatives into a new world for most people? Are we using the 80-20 rule? Are we letting the client talk 80% of the time and we're only speaking 20% of the time because the 20% of the time we're using is mostly, and I would suggest 80%, questions. And if we're not disciplined to do that, I think we will continue to misfire, not get through the storming phase to the norming and performing stage because we have inadequately brought the mental processes of both ourselves and others to a place where we can then begin to work more effectively. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, and Larry, those, yeah, great points, and I was with you for that exercise in which we utterly failed to ask all the really good questions. We asked a few, but we stopped short, and so that was really a fantastic hands-on learning experience and revealed the value of asking the good questions. So as we are approaching introducing design thinking into project management within a legal organization, as we teach our students at Vanderbilt Law School, I'm approaching it really from two different perspectives. So we are trying to arm them with the perspective of empathy going into these organizations, so as they begin hopefully to introduce project management into the work that they're doing, that they are armed with tools to, again, lower barriers and make that process as painless and ideally elegant as possible. So there is sort of that initial approach that you've got to figure out how can I do that here? How can I make project management effective in this organization, in this culture? So that's really step one. And one of the greatest gifts of design thinking as a mindset is that it has at its core empathy for those who you are designing for, working with. And, you know, empathy really is the key, the core of the pathway to establishing mutual understanding. And when you have mutual understanding really nailed down well in the project management process, then you are, I mean, it's insurance against all the things that can go wrong and make a project fail. So, you know, again, the alignment really is so spot on, and, you know, bringing the empathy and establishing that common understanding through each phase is just incredibly powerful and valuable. So, you know, we've given you one tool. It's ask the good question. I know that's not rocket science, may seem incredibly obvious, but as Larry and I just experienced in the exercise we went through, it's super simple to forget to do it, especially when you're in a hurry, you're anxious, and, you know, you've got time constraints. It's easy just to forget, just to not do it. Again, outside the scope of our conversation today, to do a deep dive into all the tools design thinking offers, but I can say to you there are 3 steps you can take to immerse yourself in design thinking and figure out what tools are relevant and valuable for the work that you're doing in your organization, or if you are a consultant with your clients. And again, simple, not rocket science. Step 1, read. We're going to share some resources that I find particularly helpful, some of which we're using with the students we're teaching this semester, that give you a range of exposure to design thinking in different contexts, and including a couple of resources that are specific to project management, although not really to legal project management, because the overlap and value in applying design thinking to legal project management is pretty nascent. But you start by reading, understanding, seeing what others have done, understanding the basic fundamental concepts. Step 2 has got to be experiencing it. You need to go to a workshop, and by workshop I mean an opportunity to get your hands dirty and really go through the full design thinking process to solve a problem, create a service, whatever the approach is, to go from A to Z through that entire process with a team. Because going through the process and seeing all the phases in action and working with a group of people really gives you a very strong sense of how it works, and you will see throughout that experience you will draw connections to how this can be valuable in the work you do in your organization. So you read, you go experience it in some workshops. Ideally, you find some workshops that are going to give you access to folks who are working in the legal profession. I know that there are a couple of those popping up, and I will try to share some of that information if I can locate it in the after webinar materials. Step 3 is you take these ideas and you take them into your organization and you start experimenting. So in the last conversation, Josh talked about some things they're doing at Seifert and how they're doing them, and great examples of how they're taking these tools and techniques and experimenting with them in their particular organization. And that's what you've got to do. Not everything is going to work everywhere. Not every tool is going to work for every process, every organization, but there are definitely solutions and tools and techniques that will work in any organization. The point being, there's not one single way, and that's one of the beauties of the range of tools that design thinking offers, especially as they apply to project management. So it stuck in my head after Josh's conversation with the group last month. He used the phrase, "we work quietly." So that's how design thinking is finding its place in the work that Seifert is doing in project management. And I really, I think it's a beautiful phrase, an elegant one, if I may say, and I think offers some guidance as to how others can take these ideas into their organizations. But again, the idea being there is no one way. There can be multiple ways to make it work.
And that drives us lawyers a lot crazy, does it not? And especially if we have the engineering chops or the analytical chops to add to our toolkit project management, because we've seen Gantt charts and PERT charts, and we know there's a beginning and an end, and there are these parallel or sequential paths, and the Gantt chart tells us when it's supposed to start and when it's supposed to stop. And if you haven't picked up the work by David and Susan, I know David's on the call, don't know if Susan is, just read about our personalities as lawyers. 1, we're hyper skeptical. 2, we are hyper urgent, and 3, we are hyper autonomous. And on the negative side, we're not very resilient. So we like things that we can control and control others. It's our nature, it's what we've been trained to do, it's probably what makes us good lawyers in the first place. It does not make us good rainmakers, because rainmakers, those who are bringing the business to firms, and I would suggest those that are successful in selling and implementing legal project management, are probably more wired like a design thinker, someone who has empathy, someone who knows how to ask questions and not be the world's Western expert on all things. And if we can get our minds around moving in a slightly different way to accomplish extraordinarily similar objectives, I think we'll do ourselves a much better job because it's organic. It's like the ebb and flow of water. Yes, it goes in a general direction, but nobody can predict the path of a raindrop. It's going to change with every adaptation that needs to be met as the course of that water drop goes downhill. If we don't learn how to be adaptive, we're probably not going to learn to survive. I think it was some guy named Darwin who said that the survivors and the fittest are not the biggest, the strongest, nor the smartest. There's no guarantee that any of those things will make you survive. The thing that the survivors do is adapt to changing circumstances. And I would suggest that's a skill set that we really, really need to embrace. One of the other pieces that will be added to our materials when sent to you is a phenomenal piece that I discovered in the Harvard Business Review, just this quarterly journal. It built upon a 10-year longitudinal study conducted by MIT over successful businesses. The Wharton School conducted this study. And what's a successful business? Well, it's one that blows the top off all the economic metrics. It's productive, it's profitable, the employees are engaged, there's little sick time, there's little compensation claims as an excuse not to work. It's just economically a superstar. Well, what we now know is that those cultures that are productive are cultures built on trust, not fear. And then the remainder of the article talks about the neuroscience of generating trust. And how we lead is going to be the biggest indicator of how successful we are in helping change take place. It can never be forced. It cannot be coerced. It can be encouraged and influenced. And so I'm hoping that we can all pick up a few tidbits from other disciplines to help us do the job of LPM implementation even better.
Larry, I think that is exactly it. When you're talking about the organic nature of this process, again, remembering that what we're really talking about is a team of people trying to get work done together, right? And so as much as we want a process to be very neat and orderly and linear, if people are involved in the process, it's likely not going to be any of those things. We also understand that a legal project almost definitionally, although not always, but almost definitionally, is going to include factors and contingencies and things that happen that fall not within our strict control. So you're going to have to shift and pivot and react and perhaps change course based on something that happens in a project. It's not going to necessarily be neat and orderly. And again, going back a few slides and looking at the human-centered design thinking process. So, you know, it may be that if you're a project manager in an organization, a legal organization, in a firm, in a general counsel's office, it's not, I'm not necessarily suggesting that you are going to take the notion of design thinking and impose it upon the teams that you're working with. You may never get to that point for a whole host of reasons, but as someone who does have to herd the cats, who is dealing with a group of people in a process that is almost definitionally not going to be neat and orderly, what a gift to have a mindset of human-centered design thinking when you can approach things very empathetically, but also from the perspective of your goal really is to come up with solutions create examples of those solutions, test them out, let small failures happen, and learn from that. So the iterative nature of the feedback, if a project manager can approach this process from a design thinking standpoint, is just incredibly valuable, and perhaps may even help you remain sane as you know, as you're learning how to implement successful projects in your organization. And I think there's another point,
All of which
Larry, that you wanted
is,
to make.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just
Yeah, and this is yeah, this is the dilemma of our age, right? We are living in a technology-driven age, and we forget that even the master of human-centered design thinking, Steve Jobs, Apple represents design thinking by virtue of technologies that are intuitive to the user. And I don't know if you knew this, it was Kat that told me, I believe Apple employs legions of anthropologists who literally scour the world for human response to the kinds of things Apple is building. And if Jobs could recognize that technology is not the solution, but people are, then we should all become far more people-centric and not wait any longer for the magic technology bullet that's going to solve all of our legal, administrative, and efficiency problems. There will never be such a thing. However, with the tools that human-centered design thinking can provide and pivoting in our own approach to the way in which we help others embrace change, we can be far more effective, I believe, and do a far better job of getting better outcomes from the projects in which we are involved. Because we know, if we look at the statistics, project management has a dismal success record. And I don't think it's because of the technologies or the methodologies of project management. It's because we haven't been people-centric. And again, one of those lawyer defaults is urgency. And that means cut to the chase, get it done. You can't spend too much time on this, and therefore much of the work that goes in on the front end of project management seems so wasteful to lawyers and those responsible for legal problems. But what we know is that over time, that time spent pays enormous dividends. And I think all that we're suggesting is, as you want to be an agent of change, as I'm confident we all do, please go and find some additional tools to add to your toolkit that will make you be more effective from the people perspective. Because once they get their mind around the value of the change, it's much easier to influence them, teach them, because we're now being, first of all, it's only the human that can bring creativity to bear, and only the human who can exercise judgment. Machines can't do those things. So when we figure out the role that we can play on the human side of the equation, and it's going to take some learning on all of our parts. As I've already admitted, I've still got a lot to learn. But listening to and following the example of people like Kat has enormously assisted me, and therefore I'm encouraging us all to do something similar. Joshua was spot on when he and Kim last month told us, first of all, you can't march in waving the flag of human-centered design as the savior or the solution to all your problems. You have to work quietly. Legal project management bears the same fate. We have to work quietly. We have to understand the human need before we can offer solutions. And probably most of us on this phone call, that goes entirely against our grain because we're lawyers and we believe in the urgent. We are very skeptical and we're extraordinarily autonomous, and we're not very resilient. We don't deal with failure very well at all. So all of that to say, there isn't one way. there are many ways. Are we able to find the best way for each different set of client interactions that we have? And if we can begin to do that, I believe our entire effort to educate the legal world with legal project management, lean, and where appropriate, Six Sigma, will take on a very different character.
Absolutely, Larry, and that, you know, and I went back
So
to
I
the
think
one
we
that,
have time for questions.
yes, we even have a
Yeah, I'm sorry,
slide.
go ahead.
We even have a slide, Q&A time.
All right. Well, thank you, Larry and Kat. That concludes the PowerPoint segment of our presentation, but as promised, we'll move on to the Q&A section. So it looks like we've had a few questions that have piled up here. First of which, as technology continues to perform more legal-related tasks, how can real lawyers compete with robo-lawyers?
I love that one. May I? Well, I think I alluded to it in some of those last remarks. I happened to coincidentally be at a conference at Sanford Law School in Birmingham right now, and I stepped out to do this webinar, at which Andrew Arruda from Ross and Ro Frazier from Cicada and other leading legal technology producers and providers are speaking to an audience of lawyers and law students about the role technology plays in law. And there are some things that are absolutely incontrovertible. And those are that there are things that technology can do that we as humans cannot possibly keep up with. As Andrew told us just a few moments ago, can you read, digest, and analyze 1 million pages of legal precedent in 2 seconds? Doubtful anybody would raise their hand to do that. So why do we lawyers think that we can do it better? When the data says Ross can do it better, faster, and cheaper, and get this, generate more profitability opportunities by those who use it. And that's not Andrew speaking. That was an independent white paper that they commissioned to analyze the economic impact of Ross, a Watson-based legal research tool. So it just seems to me we lose the argument if we try to suggest that technology has no place in the proper delivery of legal services. It's a tsunami, it will not stop, and we can't turn it back. Therefore, what do we do that technology can't do? And I want to let Kat speak to that because she's the one who spoke it first to me, and it has been a very impressive learning point to understand how we wed ourselves with technology, but we can never beat it at its own game. Kat, what do we do that technology can't do?
Well, we're creative. So I think that, you know, there are multiple examples of really the perfect combination is the human combined with the smart technology. So for example, a computer can beat a human in chess head-on competition. The computer's always going to win. However, if a human and computer play another human, that interaction, that game, that competition is much more elegant and enjoyable for the humans involved. And so I bring that directly into how we practice law, how we, you know, manage a legal project. If we use good, smart technology but bring to bear our human creativity, we bring to bear our capacity for empathy, which the machine does not have, and which gives us the ability to create that common understanding with the people we're working with, all working towards the same goal. And if we bring to bear our unique human judgment. Now, arguably, perhaps with the development of artificial intelligence, machines are developing some judgment capacity that might look a little bit like ours, but right now we still have the machines beaten in that aspect as well. So we bring our creativity, our empathy, our unique human judgment to bear, and with the smart machine, I mean, that's an incredibly powerful force to reckon with, but we're integral to that equation. Machines can't do it without us. We are better with the machines.
All right, thank you very much for that analogy, Kat. That was great. It looks like we have a few more questions queued up here, but just a reminder for those of you that are new to GoToWebinar, or it's your first time attending a GoToWebinar session, if you have any questions, please enter them into the question box on the GoToWebinar panel. Moving on to our second question, what are the reasons LPM hasn't achieved greater implementation among lawyers, law firms, and legal departments?
It's a $64,000 question, right? Well, I think there are many reasons. Some of them is just the innate resistance of those whose business model has been very good to them, and it's hard to argue with that. You know, as I think Susskind has said it, I don't know if he coined the phrase, but it's certainly been said a lot, and that is you can't tell a room full of millionaires their business model is broken. Interestingly, Kat and I had a conversation earlier this week with one of those millionaires. And although he understands that the pressure that clients are putting on law firms, and he's a partner in a law firm, will continue to increase, and he understands that in terms of pricing, you have to be more predictable in your pricing. Of course, he's speaking the language of legal project management now. He says, and it was just stunning to us to hear him say it, but the business of law will never change. That because we have created a machine built on leverage, and that out of every 7 associates hired, only 1 is going to make it to partner, and when we hire them, we expect them to give us all their time, and I will tell them how much time they will spend on a task, because I've factored it into the budget sent to the client that's been signed off on. They better. I was stunned. In other words, there's a law firm that says we will ensure that any associate succeeds only to the extent they spend the time we tell them they must. And if it's a 5-hour task and they come in at 2, well, then they're not the little good associate we thought they were. The power of that business model, selling waste rather than efficiency, is overwhelming. So I think that's one of them. That's one of the real key drivers, both of which are illustrated in the Georgetown report from January, and then the Altman-Weil report last November. It's entrenched, so there's an enormous amount of resistance at the control level of law firms, and I'm happy to say there are exceptions to that. Baker Donaldson presents a nice, wonderful alternative. Thank you, David, for leading that charge and helping change a culture. Seifert Shaw is another. Hopefully Kim and Josh are on this phone call as well. But look at the others. How many are there like those 2 law firms? I'm glad to say there are more, and more often than not, lawyers within those firms who realize that that business model has no sustainability are leaving to start new law firms. And they're doing it from the bottom up, creating efficiencies as they go, embracing technology and bringing methodologies such as project management in at the ground level. So that's one big reason. Kat, do you have another to offer?
I think you covered it. Well done.
Well, and I guess the whole premise of this particular session is to suggest that maybe we need to learn from disciplines that are foreign to our own. So maybe we need to listen to neuroscience and how people make decisions to change their mind. I had the great fortune this past fall to be invited to speak at an addiction treatment conference. And these are all addiction specialists. They're physicians and nurses and social workers and business people that are creating addiction treatment centers. And so I tested the theory that I didn't know how it would be received in my presentations, and I asked the question, is perhaps our biggest addiction Not alcohol, not drugs, not spending, not food, but our addiction to the status quo. And I was surprised but delighted to hear from the professionals in the field who treat addictive behavior all day long. That is our human addiction. We don't like change. So how do you help people do that? Well, we don't do it in our traditional ways by bringing a hammer to every problem. We have to work quietly. And so there's so much to be learned from neuroscience and design thinking that can help us do better at what we do. And I just encourage us to open our own minds to see how we can add these tools to our arsenal to be more effectively in influencing change on the part of those who are innately resistant to it, as are each of us.
All right. Thank you, Larry. Our third and final question that it looks like we have here today is, where in the LPM process are design thinking tools a natural fit?
Well, that's you, Kat.
So I'll hop in on that one. Yeah. So, I made a point earlier in the conversation that the real core of human-centered design thinking is empathy, coming at your project from an empathetic standpoint. And, it is proven fact, hard data, that an empathetic mindset does enable a common understanding with the folks you're working with. So I think, to me, that this simply is common sense to have that mindset to wear the empathy hat when you're approaching the project, the design of a legal project. So, which leads naturally into the planning phase. I think that if you are asking good questions, really listening, asking better questions, you're going to push through some assumptions, you're going to push through some presumptions, achieve that deeper understanding, and create a project plan that has a much greater likelihood of success because everybody is truly on the same page. I think it comes into play when you are designing how you're going to communicate in a project. It comes into play when you decide how you're going to choose the technology that the team's going to use to do the project work and, again, communicate about the project. So if you're using some of the tools and techniques integral to design thinking, you're going to approach that from the perspective of your users, of your stakeholders, and it's going to give you insight into how you can design a project plan that's going to work for the people that it's designed to serve, keeping the user/stakeholder central to that process. It can definitely be a part of the stakeholder analysis process, again, depending on how deep a dive you're going to go into that, into the team forming process. There are so many entry points throughout the project phases of a project that provide opportunity for these tools and techniques. Larry, you have anything you'd like to add? I know we're about out of time.
Yeah, and we don't have to keep them till the hour. If anybody has any more questions, we certainly would welcome them. But hopefully we've just opened our minds to think a little bit more creatively about how we can better do our work. I think everybody on this call understands totally the value of what we know will help lawyers satisfy their clients to a much greater degree and transition a law business that has succeeded by selling waste to a law business that can ultimately succeed by selling efficiency. And there's plenty of evidence of that. And I've talked to lawyers at Seifert who have a very profitable practice because they know what they're doing and they price it in a way that when they beat their budget, they have a realization of 110% rather than 40%. And if you need to know how you get there, I'll be happy to share that with you. But it's provable. So if we can help our industry find the enticement that's on the other side of efficiency, then we can have an enormous benefit to bring. And I believe this is the year. I know That's a pretty bold statement, but the data is all there. Those who are buying legal services are not standing still much longer for the black box billing model. And whether it's capped budgets or fixed fees, the people purchasing legal are insisting that those who provide it do it more efficiently with predictable pricing, and the risk on the provider side, not the purchaser side. Folks, that's our calling. That's what we do. So if we can just help our friends get over the resistance factor and understand that we can have our lives back. Literally, we can have our lives back if we begin to understand the value of selling efficiency. And here's the added plus, and this I'll stop with. What about that 80% factor that some say are those who are unserved in law? Because law has become too expensive, too inaccessible, and we lawyers have been too whatever they don't trust. What if we could help drive down the price of legal services? Look at the untapped market of law that could be provided if we can lower the price and increase the avenue and the access. And I'm not talking about access to justice in the pro bono sense. I'm talking access to justice for all at prices they can afford, because the ability to afford it is a value that they see and are willing to pay for. That's a massive shift, but we're at the helm, friends, and so we can take advantage of that opportunity like none other.